My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 41 years old, and I used to be a colonel in the United States Army. Now I live alone on the edge of a quiet town in upstate New York where no one asks too many questions. I like it that way. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Thick white envelope, no return address. The kind of letter that knows exactly what it's doing, showing up uninvited but impossible to ignore. It was from my sister's attorney. I hadn't heard from Amanda or my mother in almost 6 years. The last time I saw either of them was after my third deployment, when I came home for 2 weeks and found my room emptied, repainted, and turned into a guest space. They said it was time to move on. Inside the envelope was a notification from probate court. My father had passed months ago. I was being summoned to a hearing about his estate. That's how I found out my father had died. There was no phone call, no voicemail, no email, no obituary clipping. Just this letter, cold, legal, and 2 months too late. Attached was a copy of the will, and my name wasn't on it. Not even in passing. Not even to say I had declined an inheritance. Not even to say I didn't deserve it. It was as if I had never existed. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time reading that will over and over. Amanda was named sole beneficiary. My mother was listed as executive. Every asset my father had built over a lifetime of teaching, saving, and serving handed directly to them. No mention of the daughter who drove 3 days straight from Fort Hood to see him in the hospital after his first heart attack. No mention of the woman who had written him from every forward operating base she'd ever been stationed at. Just silence, official silence. I called the court to confirm the date. The clerk on the other end said, "You're listed as a witness." Is that correct, witness? Not beneficiary, not heir, not family. I told her yes. I didn't correct her. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the back porch with a mug of tea and stared at the sky, wondering if this was just a clerical error or if this was the final message they wanted to send. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was exactly what they intended. I didn't go to the funeral, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't invited. Still, I went to the cemetery 3 weeks later. No fanfare, no priest, just me, a thermos of coffee, and a small bundle of wildflowers I picked from the roadside. It was early morning. The air was cold, and the stones still looked too new, too sharp around the edges, like it hadn't settled into the earth yet. The inscription read, Franklin James Carter, 1939-2023. Beloved husband, father, teacher, soldier. I traced the word father with my fingers. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel something. The last time I saw him alive, we had lunch at a tiny diner in Syracuse. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. He asked about my back, the injury I got, rappelling off a Black Hawk during a night up. He never asked about medals. He only cared about the weight I carried in silence. Before I left, he gave me a folded piece of paper and said, "If there's ever a moment when you have to speak, make sure you're doing it for the truth, not for the anger. The truth deserves better than rage." I never opened the letter. Not until that morning at his grave. It was short, 4 lines handwritten and signed in that sharp, tidy way he always wrote when he was nervous. Evelyn, you may not always be welcome at the table, but you will always have my name. Keep it clean. Keep it proud. Love, Dad. I folded it again, pressed it to my chest, and whispered the one thing I hadn't had a chance to say when he passed. Thank you. On my way back to the car, a woman walking her dog stopped me. She looked at me for a long second and said, "I remember you from the photos. You're the daughter who left, right?" I gave her a nod. That was all I could manage. She smiled politely, almost apologetically, and said, "Margaret said you weren't coming because you knew you didn't belong anymore, that you chose the army over your family." Then she walked on. Just like that, like the truth could be replaced by a well-rehearsed lie. At that moment, something inside me shifted, not with fire, not with rage, but with weight. The kind of weight you carry when you know you're not just walking into a courtroom. You're walking into a battlefield that speaks a different language, but wounds just the same. Family demanded my entire share in court. She was never one of us, my mom said. My sister laughed. I said nothing until the judge looked at me, stood up, and said, "Colonel, I read your file." My family froze. Silence took over the courtroom. But that part's still to come. First, I have to walk in. And this time, I won't be walking in as a daughter. I'll be walking in as myself. The courtroom wasn't cold. The thermostat was working just fine. But the silence in that room, it carried a chill I felt in my bones. I walked in alone. No attorney, no entourage, no one at my side holding a stack of papers or whispering strategies in my ear. I wore a navy blazer and my father's wristwatch. Nothing more. The bailiff didn't ask who I was. He just looked at the list and nodded toward the second row. My mother and sister were already seated across the aisle. Amanda glanced at me once, expressionless, as if I were an old coworker from a job she hated. My mother didn't look at me at all. I didn't greet them. I sat down, straight-backed, hands folded in my lap, staring ahead at the judge's empty bench. The courtroom smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and dry paper. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, not fast, just steady, like I was waiting for a briefing that I already knew wouldn't go in my favor. A few feet behind me, someone coughed. No one else moved. As I sat there, I remembered a day in 2013 late summer Iraq heat, still clinging to my skin after I landed in Ramstein for a 2-day decompression layover. My unit had just wrapped up a security sweep north of Allenbar, and I'd sustained a mild concussion from an IED blast. Nothing serious, just some ringing in the ears and a tightness in my chest. That didn't go away for days. That night, I tried to call home. The line went to voicemail. I left a message. Then I emailed Amanda. I wrote, "Tell Mom I'm okay. Tell Dad I'll write soon." 2 weeks later, while helping clear storage at the base, one of the staff sergeants handed me a padded envelope with my name on it. It was unopened, postmarked from my hometown. I knew my father's handwriting instantly, but the note inside was torn, half of it missing. The envelope had already been opened and resealed. When I finally got through to him weeks later, he sounded confused. "You didn't get my letter?" "No, Dad. Amanda sent it to me, but it was opened." "Amanda," she said, "she found it in your desk and thought I'd want it." He hesitated. "I mailed that directly to base with a photo of your mother and me. There was a prayer card inside. She wasn't even home when I sent it." I never brought it up again, but I remembered. I remembered the missing words from the letter. The way Amanda shrugged when I confronted her said I was being dramatic. Paranoid. "You're not the only one with problems, Claire." I remembered that tone. That smirk. And I remembered how she once told her friends at a family barbecue, "Claire writes letters like she's in a movie. All formal and dramatic, like she's the next patent. She acts like she's better just because she's a soldier." That was Amanda. Polished on the outside, paper cut, sharp on the inside. I looked at her now, sitting in her pressed beige suit, whispering something to her lawyer. She didn't look different, but something in me had. I wasn't that young, hopeful version of myself anymore. I wasn't writing letters to earn their approval. I was here for something else entirely. I left the military the same way I entered it, quietly. There was no big ceremony, no flags waving, just a folder of discharge papers stamped honorable LeBron star and a medical report that listed my back as severely compromised due to multiple compression injuries. They didn't write down what it did to my sleep or my memory or my faith in people. When I returned home, I stayed in a friend's guest house for 3 weeks. I didn't go to the family home. I told myself I needed space to recover. But the truth was I didn't know how to walk back into a house where I had become a stranger. The day I did stop by, Amanda opened the door and said, "Oh, you didn't call. Not welcome home. Not we missed you. Just you didn't call." She let me in, but only showed me to the couch. The room that used to be mine. My childhood room had been redecorated, repainted, repurposed. It was now a Meditation space complete with a Himalayan salt lamp and printed affirmations on the wall. There was no trace of my life left there. No books, no photos, no trophies. It was like I'd been erased. I didn't ask why. I didn't cry. I just slept on the couch that night wrapped in an old fleece blanket that smelled like lavender and dust. The next morning, my mother made breakfast. She put down a single plate and said, "We weren't sure how long you'd be staying." She said it like someone preparing for a weather delay. Polite. Indifferent, clinical over eggs and toast. I told them about the base, about what it was like leaving a life behind, about my plans to go back to school. My father asked a few questions, mostly about logistics. Amanda scrolled on her phone. My mother didn't speak. When I finished, she finally said, "Well, not everyone's meant for family life. You've always been more of a soldier than a daughter." She didn't mean it to be cruel. Or maybe she did. That was the last breakfast we shared. I packed my things that afternoon and left without saying goodbye. 6 years passed. I moved 3 times, worked with nonprofit veteran groups, got certified as a trauma consultant, lived quietly, paid my bills, sent holiday cards even when no one replied, told myself it was okay, that I wasn't angry, just detached. But the truth is, I wasn't just trying to heal. I was trying not to hate them, because hating them would have meant they still mattered. And I didn't want to give them that power. So I stayed silent until now. The gavel struck once. Everyone in the courtroom shifted slightly, the air tightening like a lid sealed on a slow-boiling pot. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began by confirming attendance. Names echoed down the docket. My sister, her counsel, my mother as witness. My name came last. I raised my hand. Present. That word meant more to me than anyone there understood. In the Army, answering present wasn't just about being in the room. It meant, I'm ready. I'm accountable. Amanda's attorney stood. Slick hair. Custom suit. The kind of man who smiled only with his teeth. Your Honor, he began. My client wishes to confirm the execution of Franklin Carter's last will and testament dated May 14, 2023, and to affirm that she is the sole legal heir as specified in the document filed with your office last month. The judge nodded and motioned for the document to be submitted. A clerk retrieved the paper from the attorney's briefcase and handed it up to the bench. Amanda sat poised, legs crossed, neatly, hands resting on her lap like she was posing for a magazine about inherited power. My mother beside her wore the same blank expression I remembered from my teenage years. The one that said, I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed you exist. The judge read silently for a moment before looking up. Miss Carter, he addressed Amanda. Please clarify why your sister, Miss Holden, was not named in this will. Amanda leaned slightly forward. Because she chose to leave. She hasn't been part of this family in years. She didn't come to Dad's funeral. She didn't call. She didn't write. She made her choice. My mother spoke next unprompted. She abandoned us. Walked away. She stopped being our daughter a long time ago. Her words landed without tremor. No bitterness, just plain deliberate dismissal. She was never really one of us, Amanda added. She always thought she was above family responsibilities. She hid behind a uniform and expected us to worship her for it. There it was. The sting in my throat didn't come from shame. It came from recognition. That tone, that certainty. I'd heard it in other places, in interrogations, in briefings gone sideways, in the voices of men who mistook quiet for weakness. The judge looked at me. Miss Holden, do you wish to respond? I could feel every eye in the room pivot toward me. I sat very still. No, Your Honor, I said. Not at this moment. My voice was calm. Not out of control, not proud, just steady. It was the kind of voice you learn to use when people think they already know your story. Amanda's attorney continued, we believe this will reflect the true intent of Mr. Carter. My client was the primary caregiver during his final months, while Miss Holden made no effort to visit or participate in arrangements. I didn't flinch because in that moment, just for a heartbeat, I could see how this all looked. From the outside, I was the absentee daughter, the cold soldier, the one who walked away. They had a neat little narrative, and for now, it looked like they'd won. The silence that followed wasn't one of peace. It was the silence of verdicts that felt already made. I reached into my bag slowly, carefully, and removed a sealed envelope. It had my father's initials in the corner written in black fountain pen, the kind he only used for special correspondence. I stood. Your Honor, I said, I have something to submit to the court. 3 items, all directly connected to this case and to the deceased. The bailiff approached. I handed him the envelope, which contained a handwritten letter from my father dated 3 days after the will Amanda had filed, an official document from the Department of Defense recently declassified, and a notarized signature verification from my father's estate planner dated before his stroke. The judge opened the envelope and began reading. The room tightened again. I remained standing. The judge's eyes slowed over the page, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. When he finished reading the letter, he passed it to the clerk, then turned his attention to the verification sheet and the Pentagon file. Where did you obtain these? He asked, voice lower, now almost cautious. They were sent directly to me by my father and kept in a secure personal safe until last month, I said. The verification was conducted by a third party when I suspected a discrepancy between the version submitted by my sister and what I had received. I paused before adding, you'll notice the signature in the file does not match any on my father's financial or legal documents prior to his stroke. Amanda's attorney stood abruptly. Objection. This is hearsay. These documents haven't been verified. They have, I said calmly. Page 3 of the envelope contains a letter from Leland and Hunt Legal Group. My father's estate attorney, Richard Connor, signed it. He passed away 2 months ago, but this letter was dated before that. The judge raised a hand to silence everyone. I'll review these carefully, he said. In private session, my mother looked like she had just swallowed glass. Amanda whispered something to her lawyer, but for once she looked uncertain, her legs so confidently crossed before now shifted beneath her chair. The judge read the Pentagon memo once more, then looked up. You were in Operation Red Hound, he asked. Yes, Your Honor. I was a forward reconnaissance officer and later transitioned to strategic advisory on civilian-military reintegration. My file was classified until last year. A faint flicker passed through his expression, something close to recognition. I was a logistics officer, he said quietly. 3rd Division. I remember the name Holden. He looked down again, slowly rereading the final page, and then closed the file. We will take a brief recess, he said. This court needs time to verify the contents submitted by Miss Holden. The gavel struck once more. People began to shift, but I didn't move. Amanda's chair scraped as she stood. Her eyes locked on mine for the first time since I walked in. And I could see at the fracture, the beginning of doubt. I didn't need to prove I belonged in that family. I just needed to prove I hadn't lied about who I was. And I had without raising my voice, without making a scene, just by presenting the truth and letting it stand taller than their version ever could. The judge had barely stepped out for recess when Amanda's attorney leaned forward to gather the documents I'd submitted for examination. His hands trembled, not overtly, but enough for someone trained to see. And I saw he opened the Pentagon memo again. His eyes stopped halfway through the first page, and something shifted in his face. It was subtle, a hitch in his breath, a sudden narrowing of the eyes, the brief pause of a man recognizing a ghost where he expected a stranger. I watched him silently. He looked up at me, but this time not as an adversary, not as a hired sword defending a selfish cause. Your name is Claire Holden, he said, voice lower now. You were stationed at Camp Phoenix, fall of 2011. I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. He blinked, swallowed once. I was embedded with a diplomatic security detail. Convoy ambush route Maple. Our Lead vehicle hit an IED. We were pinned down for 12 minutes. I remembered the dust, the screaming, the oil fire licking at the pavement. The voice on the radio asking, "Are they still breathing?" My team moved in under cover of darkness. We didn't know names, just the coordinates. Get in. Extract the wounded. Get out. We lost 2 men, he said. But the rest of us lived because someone dragged us out of that kill zone while rounds were still flying. He stared at me like he was seeing something he didn't want to admit was real. "That was you," he said. Still, I didn't respond. The room had fallen into a pocket of silence, with only the rustle of legal papers and distant footsteps echoing from the hallway. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "I took this case because I was told it was straightforward. A will, a family disagreement, nothing messy." He let the memo drop back onto the table. "But this isn't a family dispute. This is an eraser." Amanda was watching, mouth slightly open, clearly confused by the turn. Her attorney turned to her and said, "We need to talk." "No," she snapped. "You said we had it handled." "I said I would represent you based on the facts." He replied, "Now I'm not sure I know what those are." His voice cracked just a little. "She saved my life, Amanda." Amanda's jaw clenched. "That doesn't make her the rightful heir." "No," he said. "But it makes her real." He stood and faced the bench even though the judge hadn't returned. "I'm withdrawing as counsel. Effective immediately." The clerk stared, stunned. Amanda rose to protest, but he had already gathered his bag. He walked past me slowly, hesitated, then said, "You're not ordinary. You save people without knowing their names." I didn't reply. He didn't wait for one. Some truths don't need confirmation. They just need room to breathe. The next surprise came from the back row, third seat from the right. Mr. Ferris, an old man with tremors in his hands and a voice like worn gravel. He stood slowly as the courtroom settled. Again. He'd been our neighbor for almost 20 years. He used to lend my father tools and tell me not to walk alone in the orchard after dark. "I have something to say," he said, holding up a plastic sleeve containing several returned envelopes. These came back to me unopened. Postmarked for Claire, but marked undeliverable. The judge returned just in time to witness the handoff. I felt the chill before I saw the names. They were my father's letters. All postmarked between 2016 and 2020. Each one labeled return to sender, but I'd never moved during that time. I'd never changed addresses. My chest tightened. "I mailed those for Frank," Mr. Ferris explained. He was shaky and couldn't get to the post office. "I took them myself. I even paid for tracking once." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Miss Holden, did you ever receive any of these?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Not a single one." Amanda shifted in her seat. "My mother didn't move. Not even a blink." The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Carter, do you have any idea why your husband's letters were never delivered?" She folded her hands calmly. "I assumed they got lost." "No," I said, voice steady. "They didn't." I pulled out my phone and opened a photo. It was a snapshot of a document I found in my mother's desk drawer a year ago during a brief visit. One she didn't know I had seen. A list of restricted contacts submitted to a federal address forwarding database. It included my name, alongside a note flagged active military. Contact may compromise family privacy and safety. No forwarding. It was signed under my mother's handwriting, dated 2 weeks after I returned home for medical leave. "You claimed I abandoned the family," I said. "But you made sure the family couldn't reach me." The silence that followed was heavier than anything said out loud. Amanda stammered. "She was protecting us. You were different, hard to talk to, always gone." "You mean I scared you?" I said, "because I wore a uniform and didn't cry at Thanksgiving." My mother didn't argue. She just sat there frozen. Maybe for the first time, even she didn't believe her own story. The final blow came from the documents Amanda had carelessly filed with the estate packet. A line item listed parcel number 7 as part of the proposed liquidation assets. It was our family cabin in Vermont. The same cabin my father took me to every summer between deployments. The same place where he taught me how to shoot, how to read terrain, how to sit in silence without needing to explain why I was quiet. I remembered him once saying, "If I ever go before your mother does, promise me you'll keep this place safe." I had until now. Amanda planned to sell it to a commercial developer. I found the listing in an online registry. It had already been appraised, zoned, and marked as pending conversion luxury spa retreat. They weren't just dividing assets. They were erasing memories. Erasing him. "They want the land," I said to the clerk. "But not the history." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what would you do with it?" I looked him square in the eye. "I'd turn it into a resource center for veterans. The kind who come home with stories they're afraid to tell. The kind no one makes room for at the dinner table." He didn't reply, but he didn't have to. Some visions don't need approval. They just need to be said out loud so someone else remembers them. 2. The courtroom door opened with a firm click. Everyone straightened in their seats as the judge re-entered, holding a single folder in his hand. My folder. He didn't sit. He walked to the bench slowly, deliberately, and placed the folder down with care. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there earlier: clarity. He cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Colonel Holden," he said. The word struck like a bell inside my chest. For a second, I thought I had misheard him, but he repeated it. "Colonel Evelyn Holden." A ripple passed through the room. I felt it in the shifting posture of the bailiff, in the sudden stillness of the clerk. Even Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "I've reviewed the documents submitted," the judge continued. "They are legitimate. The signature analysis confirms discrepancies between the submitted will and the verified handwriting of the deceased. The letter from Mr. Carter, handwritten and dated after the version filed by Miss Carter, meets the legal definition of a revised will." He paused, then added, "I have also reviewed the letter from the Department of Defense. As a former logistics officer, I recognize the clearance level and operations cited. I am aware of the procedures that surround a file of this nature, and I can personally attest to the difficulty of obtaining such declassification." He looked down at the folder again, fingers resting on the Pentagon seal. "Colonel, what you did, what you were a part of. People in this room may never understand, but I do. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could." The room had gone so still, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. "Therefore," he said, "this court recognizes Colonel Evelyn Holden as a legitimate beneficiary and executive of Franklin Carter's estate, effective immediately. The previously submitted will is invalidated." My mother gasped softly. Amanda let out a noise. I couldn't define, somewhere between a sob and a broken laugh. Her eyes filled with tears, but her mouth didn't apologize. She just stared at the judge as if he had betrayed her too. The judge turned to Amanda and her now former attorney's empty chair. "I caution you, Miss Carter, against further litigation. The evidence against your claim is conclusive. Should you wish to challenge, I advise you to secure different counsel and prepare for criminal inquiry into will tampering." Amanda's face collapsed. She sat down, trembling, blinking hard like she could unsee what had just happened. My mother didn't sit. She stood stiffly, gripping her purse strap, jaw locked. She didn't look at me, not once. The judge turned back to me. "I regret that it took a courtroom to recognize what should have been honored at a kitchen table. Your service, your sacrifice, and your integrity deserve more than silence." I nodded slowly. "I didn't come here for praise," I said quietly. "I came to keep a promise." The judge offered a faint smile. "Well, Colonel, you've done that. And more." He struck the gavel once. "This hearing is adjourned." Chairs scraped as people stood. Papers shuffled, but I remained seated. For a long second, I sat in the center of a courtroom that had once treated me like a shadow. Now it held a strange kind of stillness, as if the air had shifted. I stood finally, collected my folder, and turned toward the exit. I didn't look back, but as I passed the gallery, I heard someone whisper. She never said a word she didn't need to. And someone else replied, that's the kind of voice people remember. I stepped outside into the sunlight, not as a daughter reclaiming inheritance, but as a soldier, honoring legacy. It wasn't the victory they expected. It was the truth they couldn't ignore. Just as I reached for my bag, ready to leave the courtroom with everything settled, a voice from the back row stopped me. Colonel Holden. I turned. An older man stood up slowly from the last bench, lean frame, deep set eyes, military haircut gone silver. He wore a brown coat and carried a cane. But his posture was straight proud. There was something familiar in the way he looked at me. Not sympathy, not curiosity, recognition. He walked down the aisle deliberately, the soft click of his cane matching each step. The courtroom quieted again. I served with your father, he said. Name's Walter Rains. We were stationed together at Fort Leonard Wood in '78 and stayed in touch ever since. He talked about you constantly. I didn't know what to say. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive inside a clear evidence pouch. This, he said, raising it slightly, was given to me by your father the week before his stroke. He told me to hold on to it, to bring it forward only if things got messy. He looked around the room, then back at me. I think this qualifies. The judge, still standing behind the bench, gave a nod. The bailiff retrieved the pouch, handed it to the clerk, who then slotted it into a small courtroom laptop. The speakers buzzed softly. Then my father's voice filled the room. Rough, slower than I remembered, but unmistakably his. If this message is playing, it means Claire is standing alone again. And I failed to protect her from this. A silence fell over the room so complete I could hear the whirring of the courtroom air system. I know what Margaret and Amanda are capable of. I've seen the letters returned. I've watched them tear down photos of Claire. I heard Margaret tell our neighbor she wasn't welcome here anymore. But let me say this clearly. If Claire receives nothing from my estate, it is not because I willed it. It is because someone prevented it. If Claire is erased, it's not because she left us. It's because we chose to forget her. The recording paused, the sound of my father coughing lightly, then continuing. She never abandoned her family. She just chose a different battlefield, and she fought it with more honor than anyone in this house ever acknowledged. If she walks into a courtroom and has to fight her own blood, then shame on us, not her. Then his final words. If Claire walks out of that room with nothing, it means the living failed her. Not that she failed us. The clip ended. The room didn't move. The judge lowered his gaze. The clerk wiped her eye discreetly. Even the bailiff looked away. Amanda sat frozen. My mother, still standing, closed her eyes slowly like the weight of the voice had finally pierced through every excuse she'd built. And me, I didn't cry. I just nodded quietly. Because it was the first time in 6 years that I heard someone in my family say what I had always known to be true. My father hadn't forgotten me. He had prepared for this. He had trusted someone else to speak when he couldn't. And in doing so, he gave me something I didn't know I still needed. Permission to stop proving myself because now the truth had spoken for me. As the courtroom settled after my father's voice disappeared from the speakers, the silence was suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was loaded with shame, disbelief, exposure. A silence born not of respect, but of revelation. My mother finally spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the stillness. I did it to protect us. She didn't look at me when she said it. She stared straight ahead at the floor as if the words would land easier if she didn't have to watch them hit me. Amanda turned toward her, stunned. Mom, what? I did it. She repeated louder this time, her spine stiffening. I changed the forwarding address. I intercepted the letters. I told the lawyer Claire wouldn't be involved because I wanted peace in this family, because I didn't want her chaos to follow her home. It was like a confession that didn't ask for forgiveness. I watched you come back from war, Claire. You didn't even look like the same person. You didn't talk. You jumped at every sound. You looked at Amanda like you didn't recognize her. You scared me. I didn't flinch. And your father, she shook her head. He was soft around you. He gave you excuses. He let you be distant. You were never around for holidays. You never called. I thought you were gone for good. So you made it easier for yourself by erasing me, I said. She finally met my eyes. I made it easier for Amanda. Amanda looked like she'd just been slapped. But you were always in her shadow, my mother said, almost with resolve. People compared you, said she was the fragile one, the sensitive one. You couldn't compete with the daughter in uniform, the war hero. I didn't want her to spend her life being second best. I let the words sit in the air for a moment. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel hate. What I felt in that exact moment was a kind of clarity that felt like stepping into sunlight after years of walking through fog. You kept my father from me, I said. Not to protect Amanda. Not even to protect yourself. You did it because you didn't understand me. And rather than learn how to love something unfamiliar, you cut it out. That's not fair, she said quickly. I did what I thought was right. No, I said you did what was easy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Amanda tried to speak, but stopped herself. Her lips trembled. My mother sat back in her chair, hands clasped tight together. The pearl ring on her finger, the one my father gave her their first year of marriage, twisted slightly as she wrung her hands. I'm not here for the money, I said. I don't want the house. I don't want the accounts. I don't want the land. Everyone stared. My voice was firm, unwavering. I want only one thing. I turned to the judge then. Back to my mother. I want my father's name to remain intact. I want the story of who he loved, what he valued, and what he fought for to be told correctly, that's all. The courtroom was quiet again, but it felt different now. Not cold, not hostile, just still, like it was holding its breath. I don't need a share, I said one last time. I just need the truth to stand. And for the first time since I walked into that room, my mother's face softened. Not much, but enough that I saw something flicker. Uncertainty, maybe even recognition. Because the part of me she tried to erase was the only part left. Willing to forgive her, but only if she let go of the lie. When I stepped out into the hallway, the noise hit me like a wall. Reporters pressed forward with cameras and recorders. Strangers whispered my name like it was both sacred and scandalous. Some looked at me with admiration, others more skeptically, as if unsure whether to be impressed or afraid. I didn't stop to answer questions. I didn't make a statement. I just kept walking. But their voices followed me like an echo. I couldn't escape. She's the one who saved that entire unit in Kabul, right? Yeah, but her own mother said she was unstable. That she cut herself off. No, her mother cut her off. That's what this whole trial proved. She's a decorated officer. A colonel. Doesn't that say enough? Still, trauma does things to people. Maybe the mom was scared for a reason. I served with women like her. I heard a man say firmly. His chest was covered with a VA pin and a faded campaign ribbon. And let me tell you something, none of them were dangerous. They were tired. They were hurting. But they weren't dangerous. What's dangerous is pretending they don't exist. A younger woman in a crisp suit muttered. But if your child comes home and barely speaks, stares at walls, flinches at every loud sound, would you blame a mother for trying to protect what's left of her family? Another voice replied, maybe. But would you lie to your child's face for 6 years? Would you erase their existence just to make things easier? The hallway became a chorus of judgment, defense, and disbelief. It was like watching my life become a public referendum. Who had the right to be remembered? Who had the right to be believed? Who had the right to be family? I stood quietly in the corner, just far enough that I could hear but wouldn't be seen. One older man dressed in plain jeans and a Vietnam veteran cab shook his head and said, "That girl walked through hell overseas. Came home to silence, and now she's the one still standing here head high, saying nothing bad about nobody. That tells me more about her than any news report ever could. A few nodded, others didn't. But I didn't need everyone to agree. I just needed one thing to be clear. Silence didn't mean guilt. And not all scars are signs of danger. Some are just proof you made it through. The judge cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Colonel Holden, in light of the verified will and supporting evidence, you are now the rightful beneficiary of the estate. Do you wish to proceed with filing for full transfer? All eyes turned to me. My mother's gaze didn't rise. She stared at her lap like the patterns in the tile would suddenly offer her escape. Amanda. She looked stunned. Her lips parted slightly as if waiting for someone, anyone to interrupt and stop what was happening. But no one did. I took a breath and I stood. I'm not taking a dime, I said. The room didn't gasp. It froze. The judge blinked. Excuse me. I'm not taking a dime, I repeated louder. Not from the estate. Not from the house. Not from the accounts. None of it. Amanda's mouth opened, but no words came out. I continued slowly, carefully. My father didn't raise me to seek revenge. He raised me to serve. And if this family couldn't see that, then maybe it was never mine to begin with. The air in the courtroom shifted like the oxygen had changed weight. I turned to the clerk. Instead, I'd like to redirect my share if it can be legally arranged to establish a scholarship fund for the children of veterans, especially those who served in combat zones and came home to broken systems to silence too. Forgotten birthdays. My voice almost cracked at that last part, but I held steady. The fund will be named after my father, Captain Raymond Holden, because he remembered me even when I wasn't allowed to remember him. A ripple ran through the room. Someone sniffled. A journalist's pen scratched faster across the page. Amanda let out a choke sound. Half sob, half apology. She dropped to her knees beside the defense table, not out of drama, out of collapse, like her spine had given out under the weight of her own inheritance. Her tears weren't about the money. I could see that now. They were about being defeated by something she didn't know how to fight. Grace. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, though it wasn't clear who she was talking to. I looked at her, not with pity, not with pride, just with peace. You can keep the house, I said softly. Turn it into what Dad wanted, a center for veterans. Make it mean something. She nodded, still crying, both hands covering her face. I turned back toward the judge. There's nothing left for me here, I said. Not in bricks, not in accounts. But if one child grows up with a chance because of this, that's enough. He nodded solemnly. The court recognizes your decision and will honor the redirection of assets as requested. And, just like that, the war was over. Not the one in the courtroom, the one I'd carried for 6 years. The sun was beginning to dip behind the treetops, casting long shadows across the clearing behind the old Vermont house. I sat alone on a stone bench we had placed beneath the large oak tree, my father's favorite spot. The construction team had finished only yesterday, and I hadn't told anyone I'd be coming. There were no reporters, no family, no ceremony, just silence, just me. Just the wind whispering through the leaves, the rustle of late summer air, and the distant sound of a woodpecker somewhere beyond the hill. Beneath me on the front of the bench was a small bronze plaque. I ran my fingers across the engraving, slowly tracing the letters as if they might disappear if I blinked. In honor of Frank Holden. A father remembered by his daughter. Not a colonel, not a judge, not a soldier, not even a homeowner, a father. That was the title I wanted him to be remembered for. That was what he was to me. Long before I ever wore a uniform, before the deployments, before the wounds, before the silence. I exhaled slowly. There had been so much noise these past few weeks. Voices in court, gasps in the audience, accusations, defenses, legal jargon. Reporters, whispers in the hallway, old friends calling out of the blue to say they always knew I'd do the right thing. But here, finally, there was peace. I looked at the small clearing in front of the house. The grass had started growing. Again. The wind chimes Amanda had hung my mother's old ones still tinkled faintly under the porch roof. I didn't feel resentment anymore, or anger, or even triumph. Just completion. I had come back. I had told the truth. I had honored the man who once held my tiny hand and said, "Your strength doesn't come from fighting. It comes from knowing when to." I didn't need anyone to see this bench. I didn't need it posted on social media or written about in a magazine or sponsored by some veterans group. I just needed it to exist for me. For him, for the promise I made in a letter I was never supposed to receive, and for a legacy they tried to erase, but couldn't. I placed a single folded piece of paper beneath the bench. His handwriting from a letter he sent me years ago, the one Amanda never gave me. "If you read this, it means you're still standing. That's enough, Claire. That's enough." I smiled. The wind picked up and I whispered, "I'm still standing, Dad." And I remember. Then I stood, gave one final look to the house, to the trees, and to the small plaque that said everything I needed it to say. And I walked away, leaving behind not just the bench, but the war. You said I used to think silence was weakness. That if you didn't fight back, scream louder, make them see you, you were somehow less brave, less worthy, less real. But I've learned something else. Silence, when chosen, not forced, is a different kind of strength. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. But it stands and it stays. I stayed. Even when they tried to erase my name. Even when they told themselves I had abandoned them, not the other way around. Even when my own mother whispered to neighbors that I never belonged, I stayed. Not in their house, not in their memory, but in the truth. In the legacy of a man who never raised his voice, but taught me that dignity isn't loud. It's steady. It endures. I used to believe my absence from the family album was proof that I didn't matter. That being left out of the will meant I was never enough. That missing the funeral because I wasn't told meant I was a bad daughter. But I see it differently now. Because I was there in the letters he sent that never reached me. In the photos he kept in his desk drawer. In the plaque on that bench. Beneath the old oak tree, and in his voice on a recording I'll never forget. If Claire gets nothing, it's not her fault, it's ours. He saw me, and for me that was enough. I don't need applause. I don't need their regret. I don't need Amanda's tears or my mother's explanations. I needed only to reclaim the space they tried to take, to say without screaming, I was here. I am still here. So to anyone who's ever been told you don't belong because you were different, because you chose your own path, because you were too quiet or too brave or too unwilling to conform, I see you. And you don't have to shout to be real. You don't have to win to reclaim your name. You just have to show up. Speak when you're ready and let the truth do what truth always does, outlast the noise. I was never the loudest voice in that courtroom. But when the judge stood up, said my rank out loud, and looked me in the eye as if to say, I know who you are, that was enough, because now they know too. To everyone who ever felt erased, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. If they wrote you out of the story, write yourself back in. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with truth. Because truth doesn't shout. It doesn't slam doors or demand justice on cue. It waits. It watches, and then one day it stands undeniable. For years I let their version of the story be the only one told. I let the silence grow thick like fog until even I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was the outsider. Maybe I had no place. But that was never true. I was always there in every letter he tried to send. In every moment they chose to forget. In the legacy. I lived far away from their living room, but close, so close to the man who knew me best. And so are you. You who sat at the table but never had a say. You who kept the peace while others took the credit. You who walked away not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. You were not erased. You were waiting. So now write again. Write your story with quiet strength, with dignity, with the kind of clarity that doesn't seek revenge, but restoration. Because it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always right to keep going. One day, someone will stand up for you, a judge, a friend, a stranger, or maybe no one at all. Maybe it will be just you standing tall in your truth, and that will be enough. If they never say sorry, let that be their burden. If they never admit what they did, let that be their wound. But you keep walking. And if you ever sit on a bench with your father's name on it, or hear someone say your name with honor, or see a child walk through a door you helped open, remember this. You didn't disappear. You rose in silence. You returned with grace. And now they can't look away. So to everyone who ever felt erased, pick up the pen. The page is yours. Now before we say goodbye, I want to leave you with this. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, your hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee? Or maybe it's late at night and stories like this are the only thing keeping you company in the stillness. Wherever you are, I'm grateful you stayed with me until the end. This wasn't just a story about a courtroom or a will or a family that broke itself in silence. This was about something deeper, something I think you might carry too. It was about reclaiming your voice after it's been ignored. About honoring people who can no longer speak, and about the kind of strength that doesn't come from shouting, but from standing quietly in your truth. When the judge stood and said my name, Colonel Claire Holden, I didn't feel proud. I felt seen. And sometimes that's all any of us really need. So if you've ever felt invisible, like your story was too small or your presence didn't matter, I hope this reminds you. You were never the silence in the room. You were the reason it existed. And if this story touched something in your heart, I want to invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel not just for more stories like this, but to be part of something larger, a space where kindness still matters, where healing is possible, and where second chances aren't just fantasy, they're hope in motion. We read every comment with care. We see where you're from, what you're feeling, and how these stories find their way into your lives. So let us know. Let us know if this one stayed with you. Let us know if you've ever had to stand up when no one else would. Let us know if just maybe you found a little piece of yourself in Claire. And if not, maybe in the next story you will. Thank you for spending your time with me today. From wherever you are in the world, I hope you carry this with you. Gently. Let it settle in. Let it remind you that you matter, that your silence is not weakness, and that your return when it happens will be heard. Because sometimes the miracle doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly for your heart to open.